and reconciliation to be fostered through a reformed curriculum that leaves no room for extremism. Access to healthcare is similarly affected, with patients, including children, in need of specialized or emergency care, facing delays in reaching medical facilities. Safe and sustained access to education and healthcare, protection of civilians, and facilitation of rapid, safe, and unimpeded access to essential services must be ensured. The measures contributing to the Palestinian Authority's fiscal crisis and undermining the Palestinian economy are deeply concerning. Israel must ensure that the Palestinian banking sector can operate unobstructed and that withheld tax revenues are released, enabling the Palestinian Authority to meet its budgetary obligations and provide essential services. At the same time, the Palestinian Authority must fulfill its commitments to pursue meaningful, comprehensive reforms. This must include strengthening governance and accountability, addressing radicalization, ensuring provisions of basic services, including education, in line with the UNESCO standards, and reforming the payment system for families of prisoners. Concrete steps must also be taken to prevent incitement, discourage violence, and promote peaceful coexistence. Progress on these commitments is an essential part of international support for the Palestinian Authority and its institutions, while awaiting holding fair and inclusive elections as announced. Madam President, for decades we have witnessed that military power, as well as armed resistance, fuels the recurring cycle of violence, reignited by proponents of extreme views on both sides. This trajectory does not constitute a path to sustainable peace. Addressing both the security concerns and the legitimate aspirations of Israelis and Palestinians requires renewed momentum. The full implementation of the comprehensive plan, as put forward by President Trump and endorsed by the Security Council in Resolution 2803, requires genuine engagement by all parties. A political perspective encompassing Gaza and the West Bank is the only way to achieve long-term stability. In line with the relevant Security Council resolutions and the New York Declaration, Latvia reaffirms its commitment to the two-state solution and to contributing to the shared objective of peace and stability in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for the statement. And as I give the floor to the next speaker, I would like to warmly welcome to the Security Council Ambassador Sarah McIntosh, the new permanent representative of the United Kingdom to the United Nations. We look forward to closely engaging with you on the Council's work in the days ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. It's an honour to be here, and I look forward to working with all colleagues here and across the United Nations family. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Alek Barov and Deputy Executive Director Suleiman for your briefings. The United Kingdom is clear that the only credible path to lasting peace and security remains a two-state solution, with a safe and secure Israel alongside a sovereign and viable Palestinian state made up of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. 3 priorities to advance progress towards that goal. First, in Gaza, the United Kingdom welcomes the recent focus on implementing Security Council Resolution 2803 and wants to see it implemented in full. That means all parties delivering on their commitments, including respect for the ceasefire, Hamas fulfilling its decommissioning commitments, the phased withdrawal of the Israeli Defense Forces as set out in the 20-point plan and the Roadmap Phase 2, and the transition of governance and security control to the Palestinian Authority. We encourage the Palestinian Authority to continue implementing reforms needed to fulfill that role. We thank the US, Qatar, Turkey and Egypt for their tireless efforts to progress these negotiations. The United Kingdom will continue to work with all our partners to end the conflict in Gaza and the terror threat from Hamas. As Foreign Secretary Ed Miliband has said, conditions for the people of Gaza remain appalling. Israeli authorities must end unacceptable restrictions on aid and enable safe, sustained and unhindered humanitarian access across Gaza. Second, addressing violence in the West Bank. The United Kingdom condemns escalating violence across the West Bank. In July alone, 13 Palestinians and 2 Israelis were killed. Recent attacks by Israeli settlers on Palestinian villages and communities, in some cases alongside Israeli Defense Force personnel, are appalling. These are not isolated incidents. OCHA's July report records more than 1,300 settler-related incidents affecting over 250 Palestinian communities, around 900 Palestinians injured, and more than 3,200 displaced. And at least 3 Israelis have been killed and 24 injured this year. Children are among the most affected by this conflict. They are being exposed to repeated violence, displacement, and disruption due to movement restrictions and military operations. On the 4th of August, Israeli forces demolished 3 donor-funded classrooms at Shab al-Batum school, just weeks before the start of the school year. We call on the government of Israel to fulfill their obligations to protect the Palestinian population of the occupied territory. We welcome recent arrests and indictments by Israeli authorities of the perpetrators of settler violence. But perpetrators have acted with impunity for too long, and much more must be done to prevent and prosecute acts of violence. Israeli authorities' security measures must be proportionate, consistent with international law, and contribute to de-escalation. Third, halting expansion of settlements in the West Bank. Settlements are illegal under international law. They undermine the viability of a two-state solution, and they fuel insecurity for both Palestinians and Israelis. The government of Israel has approved 104 settlements in 4 years, an increase of 80%, and allocated unprecedented funding to the construction of new settlements. The United Kingdom condemns threats to expand illegal settlements and outposts, and opposes the decision to reintroduce the E1 settlement plan, which aims to cut the West Bank in half. We are alarmed by recent mass incursions at the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount. The status quo on Jerusalem's holy sites must be respected. Madam President, in the past weeks, we have seen renewed efforts to implement Resolution 2803, which offers the most viable pathway towards lasting peace. The deteriorating trajectory in the West Bank must not undermine that hard-won process. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Madame la Présidente, la République démocratique du Congo remercie le coordonnateur spécial adjoint pour le processus de paix au Moyen-Orient, M. Ramiz Al-Bakarov, ainsi que la directrice exécutive adjointe de l'UNICEF, Mme Anna Suleiman, pour leurs exposés édifiants. Il y a à peine un mois, le 29 juin dernier, ma délégation avait déjà eu l'occasion d'exprimer sa préoccupation face à la persistance des violences et des tensions en Cisjordanie. Les événements survenus depuis lors ne font malheureusement qu'accentuer cette inquiétude et mettent en évidence l'urgence de maintenir les conditions propices à l'établissement d'une paix durable. La République démocratique du Congo considère que la désescalade et la prévention de nouvelles tensions doivent rester une priorité absolue, dans l'intérêt de toutes les populations concernées et de la stabilité régionale. La République démocratique du Congo condamne toute violence contre les populations civiles palestiniennes comme israéliennes, ainsi que tout acte de terrorisme, et appelle toutes les parties à faire preuve de la plus grande retenue. Mon pays suit avec une attention soutenue l'évolution de la situation et les difficultés croissantes auxquelles sont confrontées les populations civiles, notamment en Cisjordanie, y compris à Jérusalem-Est. Les déplacements, les entraves à l'accès et les perturbations des services essentiels continuent d'affecter les communautés les plus vulnérables. Ma délégation est particulièrement attentive à la situation des enfants, qui sont les premières victimes des conséquences de cette instabilité. En Cisjordanie, les perturbations de l'accès à l'éducation, aux soins de santé et aux services essentiels fragilisent davantage les enfants et les familles les plus vulnérables. La République démocratique du Congo souligne l'importance de préserver autant que possible la continuité de ces services et de garantir à chaque enfant la possibilité de grandir, d'apprendre et de se développer dans des conditions dignes et favorables à son avenir. C'est ici le lieu pour la République démocratique du Congo de réaffirmer l'importance de la pleine mise en œuvre de la résolution 2334 de 2016 du Conseil de sécurité, ainsi que du respect des obligations découlant du droit international. Nous encourageons toutes les parties concernées à éviter les mesures et actions susceptibles d'alimenter davantage les tensions, de compromettre la stabilité sur le terrain ou de réduire les perspectives d'une solution négociée et durable. Préoccupée par la situation humanitaire, la République démocratique du Congo appelle à la poursuite des efforts visant à garantir un accès humanitaire sûr, rapide, prévisible et coordonné aux populations dans le besoin. Elle salue à cet égard les efforts déployés par les agences des Nations Unies et les organisations humanitaires qui poursuivent leur mission dans des circonstances difficiles. La République démocratique du Congo encourage également le renforcement de la coordination entre les acteurs concernés afin de faciliter l'acheminement de l'assistance dans le respect des impératifs légitimes de sécurité, de la protection des civils et du droit international. Une attention particulière doit être accordée à la protection du personnel humanitaire ainsi qu'à la continuité des services essentiels, notamment dans les domaines de la santé, de l'éducation, de l'eau et de l'assainissement. Madame la Présidente, le gouvernement de mon pays est convaincu que la réponse aux défis actuels doit s'inscrire dans une perspective politique plus large. La communauté internationale doit continuer à soutenir les efforts visant à créer les conditions d'une paix durable, fondée sur le dialogue, le respect du droit international et la prise en compte des préoccupations légitimes de sécurité de toutes les parties. La République démocratique du Congo reconnaît également les préoccupations légitimes de sécurité d'Israël et souligne que celles-ci, comme la protection des populations civiles, doivent être prises en compte dans le plein respect du droit international. Elle encourage ainsi toutes les parties à privilégier la retenue, à poursuivre le dialogue et à s'abstenir de toute action susceptible d'aggraver davantage la situation sur le terrain. Seul un processus politique crédible, négocié et fondé sur les résolutions pertinentes des Nations Unies permettra de parvenir à une paix juste, globale et durable, offrant aux populations la sécurité, la dignité et la stabilité auxquelles elles aspirent légitimement. Madame la Présidente, en guise de conclusion, la République démocratique du Congo réaffirme son attachement au respect du droit international, à la protection des populations civiles et à la recherche d'une solution politique durable. Elle demeure convaincue que la voie du dialogue, de la retenue, de la coopération doit prévaloir sur celle de la confrontation afin de préserver les perspectives de paix et de stabilité dans la région. La République démocratique du Congo appelle ainsi la communauté internationale à poursuivre ses efforts avec constance et détermination afin de créer les conditions propices à une paix durable fondée sur la coexistence, la dignité et la sécurité pour tous. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Liberia thanks the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process and the Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF for their qualified briefings. Excellencies, 79 years ago, Liberia cast its vote for UN Resolution 181, a vision of two sovereign homes, an Arab state and a Jewish state. One was born, and Liberia was among the first to recognize it. The other has spent nearly 8 decades caught in the cruel physics of occupation, displacement, and unfulfilled promise. Liberia has never withdrawn that vote. Today, this council treats the two-state solution like a permanent destination we describe in briefings rather than a political decision we actually enforce. We deplore, we adjoin, and meanwhile, physical facts on the ground are set in concrete. The latest UN reports lay bare a rapidly deteriorating reality across the West Bank. Over 33,000 Palestinians remain forcibly displaced from Jenin, Tokam, and North Shams, their homes emptied, their right of return denied. Acceleration of the E1 settlement project and ongoing land grabs threaten to sever the West Bank in two, dealing an irreversible blow to any viable contiguous Palestinian future. These are not administrative adjustments. They are the systematic burial of peace. Yet, Liberia's clarity remains absolute on two non-negotiable principles. First, security is indivisible. No durable peace can ever take root while Israelis live under the terror of attacks. We condemn such violence unequivocally. Concurrently, we condemn with equal severity the unbearable suffering inflicted upon Palestinian civilians, where women and children bear the catastrophic brunt of a crisis not of their making. Hamas, an armed faction that holds a population's statehood hostage to its own survival, paradoxically undermines the very liberation and much-needed statehood it claims to pursue. The full implementation of Resolution 2803 and the decommissioning of non-state weapons are essential to establishing one legitimate government, one law, and one accountable security authority. The same is and must be true about ending settlement expansion and its associated violence in the West Bank. Second, human dignity cannot be conditional. The Secretary General's reports record a staggering scale of violence and violations against children across the region. No child should ever become collateral damage to the political failures of adults. Madam President, Liberia asks this Council to measure our credibility on this issue against four tests: protection, return, accountability, and viability. If we fail these four tests, let us then drop the diplomatic pretense. We are not preserving a two-state solution. We are presiding over its slow motion disappearance. History will not ask whether this Council issued enough press statements or debated the Middle East and Palestinian question time without number. It will ask whether, when the window for peace was being sealed shut beneath concrete and violence, we had the courage to act. Excellencies, Liberia cast its vote for two states in 1947. 79 years later, we continue to stand for the security of both peoples, the dignity of both peoples, and the absolute right of their children to inherit a future defined by peace, definitely not by perpetual war. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Liberia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. The distinguished permanent representative of Liberia just reminded, and very rightly, this council of its responsibilities towards this situation that we are discussing. And the two briefings we have heard today are, in fact, calls for action. The situation as presented is grave. The figures quoted speak for themselves. Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Al-Akbarov provided the crux. These are not isolated developments. These are interconnected steps building on decades of conflict and occupation that are undermining the prospects of the two-state solution. And Deputy Executive Director Hannah Suleiman informed us of the wide-ranging humanitarian consequences of what was happening in the West Bank, especially for children, and again rightly called for protection. The Council must respond because the situation in the occupied West Bank is deteriorating rapidly. What we are witnessing is a clear pattern of coordinated illegal measures designed to entrench the occupation, alter the demographic and territorial realities on the ground, and undermine the prospects of a Palestinian state. Settlement expansion has reached an alarming scale. The expansion of settlements in the E1 area, the launch of the Crimson Thread project, and the settlement activities in the heart of West Bank are all part of a broader effort to fragment the Palestinian territory. This is accompanied by unprecedented settler violence. The West Bank has experienced its largest displacement crisis since 1967. Furthermore, expanded unlawful Israeli authority over land registration, administration, and enforcement is compounding de facto annexation in violation of UN Security Council resolutions and the ICJ advisory opinions. Alongside these measures, the continued withholding of Palestinian revenues is severely undermining Palestinian institutions. These revenues belong to the Palestinian people and must be released immediately and in full. We are equally alarmed by escalating provocations at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram Al-Sharif. On 24th July, the group of 8 Arab Islamic countries in their statement have condemned the continued mass incursions by settlers. The cumulative effect of these mutually destructive policies and actions is intimidation, dispossession, and forced displacement, thereby perpetuating the cycle of occupation and annexation, all in flagrant violation of international law. Madam President, in Gaza, the humanitarian situation is extremely fragile. President Trump's comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict provided an important opportunity to alleviate humanitarian suffering and advance a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. This opportunity must not be allowed to be squandered. Pakistan has welcomed the positive developments under the Board of Peace towards the implementation of the Gaza Peace Plan and Resolution 2803. We appreciate the mediators, including the US, Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, for their sustained efforts. However, Israel's continuing military escalations and recent rejection of the roadmap risk undermining this diplomatic process and jeopardizing the prospects for peace. In view of the concerning developments, the international community and this Council in particular must act without delay. First, the Council must ensure that Israel, the occupying power, immediately halt all settlement activity and reverse all unlawful measures aimed at altering the status, character, and demographic composition of the occupied Palestinian territory in line with relevant Security Council resolutions, including 2334. Second, settler violence needs to end immediately, and those responsible must be held accountable. Third, the Palestinian people must be provided international protection, as also requested by the Palestinian president in his letter to the Council. And the Council must respond to the 4 recommendations concerning protection that were made by the UNICEF representative today. Fourth, Israel must respect the historical and legal status quo at the holy sites, including Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram al-Sharif, and halt all provocative actions. Fifth, the Security Council Resolution 2803 and the comprehensive peace plan must be implemented fully and in good faith. The Council must have a serious discussion how to tackle the obstacles and violations. Madam President, as the foreign ministers of the group of 8 Arab and Islamic countries, including Pakistan, affirmed on 6th August in their statement, the ongoing Israeli violations in the Gaza Strip cannot be viewed in isolation from the attacks carried out by settlers in the occupied West Bank, the unlawful expansion of settlements, and the unilateral measures aimed at altering the status quo in occupied Jerusalem. Taken together, these practices constitute a systematic policy aimed at imposing a fait accompli by force, undermining the foundations of the two-state solution. Madam President, the situation is approaching a dangerous tipping point. Unless this trajectory is reversed, the consequences for the two-state solution and for peace and stability across the region could be catastrophic. The path to peace is clear. It lies in ending the Israeli occupation and enabling the Palestinian people to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination through the establishment of an independent, sovereign, viable, and contiguous state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. It is the only credible foundation for a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, Россия поддержала созыв сегодняшнего заседания Совета Безопасности с целью с акцентом на положение дел на западном берегу реки Иордан. Исходим из недопустимости дальнейшего размывания международного внимания к задаче достижения справедливого и долгосрочного ближневосточного регулирования, краеугольным элементом которого был и остается палестино-израильский конфликт. Противостояние, которое спустя десятилетия является ключевым раздражителем в регионе, поддерживая его общее кризисное состояние и провоцируя появление новых очагов напряженности на обширном пространстве всего Ближнего Востока. Благодарим заместителя спецкоординатора ООН по ближневосточному мирному процессу Рамиза Алакбарова и заместителя исполнительного директора ЮНИСЕФ Ханну Сулейман за обстоятельные доклады по ситуации на СБРИ. Разделяем тревожные оценки представителей ООН. По сути, Западный берег подходит к точке невозврата с рисками глубокой дестабилизации военно-политической обстановки во всем регионе. Причины такой опасной тенденции общеизвестны и кроются в ползучей экспансии Израиля на ОПТ, эскалации поселенческого насилия и беспрецедентном ужесточении израильских ограничений на передвижение палестинских жителей. Вопреки позиции большинства международного сообщества, Западный Иерусалим продолжает незаконную линию на строительство новых поселений. На днях власти разместили очередной тендер на возведение свыше 600 единиц жилья в провинции Рамалла, Эльбира. Чрезвычайного уровня достигло насилие поселенцев, совершаемое не только безнаказанно, но иной раз при попустительстве израильских военных. В конце июля, начале августа по ряду городов прокатилась волна нападений, в ходе которой радикалы поджигали мечети, громили дома и автотранспорт, десятки людей получили ранения. Судя по открытым источникам, насилие поселенцев бьет новые антирекорды. С начала текущего года совершено более 11 тысяч атак, от рук израильских гражданских лиц погибло свыше 20 мирных жителей Западного берега. Параллельно наблюдается интенсификация операции армии обороны Израиля по зачистке населенных пунктов Сбри и лагерей беженцев. Силовые рейды сопровождаются произвольными арестами палестинцев и масштабными ограничениями на перемещение. Особую обеспокоенность вызывает и то, что в результате подобных мер крупнейшие палестинские города оказываются заблокированными, перестают функционировать даже службы экстренной медицинской помощи. Призываем Израиль отказаться от любых произвольных шагов, включая поселенческую активность, подрывающих перспективы двугосударственного решения, принять эффективные меры по обузданию насилия поселенцев и незамедлительно вернуться к выполнению положений профильных резолюций Совета Безопасности и Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН. Госпожа председатель, не меньшую тревогу вызывает и взрывоопасная ситуация в другой части ОПТ, в секторе Газа. Практическая реализация мирного плана Соединенных Штатов по Газе фактически стоит на месте. Безусловно, важно, что благодаря усилиям посредников удалось остановить масштабное кровопролитие в анклаве. Однако режим прекращения огня продолжает методично нарушаться, прежде всего израильской стороной. Об этом наглядно свидетельствует статистика жертв. Менее чем за год с момента формального вступления в силу РПБД израильтяне убили почти 1300 палестинцев. Среди них, как следует из сводок ЮНИСЕФ, почти 300 детей. То есть в течение последних 300 дней в Газе ежедневно от рук израильских военных погибал один ребенок. Несмотря на эту трагическую реальность, здесь, в стенах Совета Безопасности, ряд западных делегаций на протяжении последних месяцев возлагал всю полноту ответственности за пробуксовку мирного плана по Газе исключительно на Хамас. Все мы помним, как в ходе заседания СБ в адрес руководства палестинского движения звучали настойчивые призывы незамедлительно согласиться сложить оружие, не препятствовать работе Национального комитета по управлению Газой и принять дорожную карту высокого представителя Совета мира Николая Младенова. Хотелось бы надеяться, что такое же единство и решительность наши западные коллеги проявят и в отношении другой стороны конфликта с учетом публичного отказа Западного Иерусалима от дорожной карты и согласия Хамас на сделку. Госпожа председатель, неоднократно отмечали, что успех любой мирной инициативы по БВУ будет измеряться достижением главной цели – созданием единого, независимого и непрерывного государства Палестина на Сбри и в Газе со столицей в Восточном Иерусалиме. Созданием государства, сосуществующим в мире безопасности с Израилем. Как показывает опыт последних лет, нельзя решить палестинский вопрос, равно как и весь комплекс ближневосточного регулирования, с наскока или за счет продвижения ситуативных келейных схем. Несостоятельные попытки отдельных стран замкнуть на себя роль единственного посредника. Тем более, когда главный посредник играет исключительно в пользу одной из сторон арабо-израильского конфликта. В таких условиях едва ли приходится ожидать справедливости и реализации чаяний палестинского народа. Тем не менее, альтернативный путь всегда остается открытым. Добиться устойчивой стабилизации и оздоровления ситуации на Ближнем Востоке можно и нужно за счет налаживания скоординированных международных и региональных усилий с опорой на обширную международно-правовую базу регулирования и ее ключевой элемент в виде формулы двух государств для двух народов. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, señora Presidente. Panamá agradece la convocatoria de esta reunión y expresa su reconocimiento al señor Ramiz Al-Akbarov, subcoordinador especial para el proceso de paz en el Oriente Medio, y a la señora Hanan Suleiman, directora ejecutiva adjunta de UNICEF, por sus valiosas y conmovedoras exposiciones. Asimismo, reconocemos a los representantes del Estado de Israel y del Estado Observador de Palestina que nos acompañan en esta reunión. Observamos con profunda preocupación el creciente deterioro de la situación en Cisjordania, que han descrito con cifras los expositores, donde la reciente escalada de violencia e intimidación sigue cobrando vidas, provocando el desplazamiento de comunidades y agravando la situación humanitaria. A ello se suman las restricciones de movimiento que siguen limitando el acceso de la población civil a servicios esenciales, incluida la atención médica de emergencia, así como a sus medios de vida, agravando las condiciones que enfrentan las comunidades más vulnerables. Tal como lo ha explicado con dramática claridad la señora Suleiman en su exposición, entre quienes sufren de manera más aguda las consecuencias de esta situación se encuentran los niños. La persistencia de la violencia, el incremento de los ataques y los desplazamientos forzados no solo afectan a Cisjordania, objeto de esta sesión, sino que también comprometen el bienestar, el desarrollo y el acceso de miles de niños a una educación segura y continua. Por ello, reiteramos la importancia de garantizar un acceso seguro, continuo, sin temores ni intimidación y sin interrupciones a la educación. La protección de la niñez y el acceso a la educación, así como la disponibilidad de atención médica adecuada, son elementos esenciales para preservar la resiliencia de las comunidades y sentar las bases de una paz duradera. Las escuelas deben permanecer como espacios seguros de aprendizaje y protección, libres de temor, de intimidación y de los efectos del conflicto. Toda afectación a la infraestructura educativa o interrupción del acceso a la educación compromete las perspectivas de futuro de los niños. Señora Presidente, la violencia no solo cobra vidas y destruye medios de subsistencia, también genera un clima de temor permanente que limita la libertad de movimiento, expone a las personas víctimas de los ataques a riesgo de desplazamiento y deteriora su salud física y mental al convertir actividades cotidianas como salir de casa en una fuente constante de inseguridad. Por ello, protección de la población civil debe seguir siendo una propiedad inmediata, en pleno respeto del derecho internacional, incluido el derecho internacional humanitario, así como de las resoluciones pertinentes de este Consejo. En este contexto, Panamá reitera su respaldo a la labor que continúan desempeñando las Naciones Unidas y sus agencias, y en particular la loable gestión de UNICEF, junto con las organizaciones humanitarias internacionales y locales en la asistencia a la población civil, en la protección de los niños y en el acompañamiento de los esfuerzos dirigidos a preservar la estabilidad. Esa labor debe poder desarrollarse con seguridad, independencia e imparcialidad, en pleno respeto del derecho internacional, incluido el derecho internacional humanitario. Reiteramos por ello el llamado a garantizar la protección del personal humanitario y a facilitar un acceso humanitario pleno, seguro, rápido y sin trabas para quienes lo necesitan. La persistencia de la violencia, la falta de avances políticos, los ataques continuos y las medidas que incrementan las tensiones continúan debilitando las condiciones necesarias para preservar un horizonte de paz creíble. Reiteramos que cualquier acción unilateral que altere la realidad sobre el terreno es incompatible con el espíritu y los objetivos de las resoluciones pertinentes de este Consejo, incluida la resolución 2334 de 2016, cuya implementación sigue siendo esencial para preservar las bases de una paz justa, duradera y mutuamente aceptable. Para ello resulta indispensable retomar un proceso político creíble, fortalecer la confianza, apoyar una autoridad palestina reformada y capaz de ejercer eficazmente sus responsabilidades y evitar medidas unilaterales que sigan alejando las perspectivas de una solución negociada de conformidad con el derecho internacional y las resoluciones pertinentes de las Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席。首先，中方对哥伦比亚强烈地震遇难者表示深切的哀悼，向遇难者家属和伤者表示诚挚的慰问。相信在哥伦比亚政府带领下，哥伦比亚人民一定会齐心协力，早日战胜灾害，重建家园。中方支持安理会举行本次紧急会议，这非常及时必要。我感谢阿拉克巴罗夫副特别协调员和苏莱曼副执行主任的通报。中方对近期巴勒斯坦被占领土局势升级深感担忧，对持续暴力造成越来越多的平民伤亡深感痛心。在当前地区局势加剧动荡的背景下，巴勒斯坦问题不能被忽视和边缘化。国际社会应当迅速采取行动，全力遏制冲突暴力，拯救无辜生命，捍卫公平正义。我讲3点：第一，必须正本清源，切实尊重巴勒斯坦人民的基本权利。一段时间以来，约旦河西岸和加沙局势急剧恶化，巴勒斯坦人民承受的苦难愈发深重。究其根本，是因为国际法基本原则未得到遵守，巴勒斯坦人民享有的生存权和发展权长期遭到漠视。巴勒斯坦人的生命同其他民族一样珍贵。国际社会必须树立正确的是非观，进一步凝聚共识，及时纠正一切否认、侵犯巴勒斯坦正当权利的错误言行，保障巴勒斯坦人民获得平等权利，切实维护国际公道正义。第二，必须果断行动，采取有效措施制止冲突暴力。约旦河西岸形势危险升级，占领方推进定居点扩张计划，侵犯和破坏宗教场所，封锁难民营，并实施大规模逮捕，定居者暴力愈演愈烈。联合国近东巴勒斯坦难民救济和工程处培训中心2次遭到强闯，令人震惊。保护平民不是空洞的口号，而是占领方应尽的国际法义务。以色列必须落实安理会第2334号决议，停止定居点活动，遏制定居者暴力，确保严肃问责。工程处根据授权正常履职，应该得到尊重。加沙的形势同样令人担忧。和平委员会宣布停火协议第2阶段安排取得进展后，以色列仍拒绝停止在加沙的军事行动。停火协议达成 已满300天，但持久停火气未实现。根本症结不是缺少停火方案，而是缺少停火的政治意愿。中方呼吁以色列和有关各方真诚全面履行加沙停火协议，呼吁以色列遵守国际人道法，解除人道物资准入限制，对当事方有重要影响的国家应为缓和局势采取切实行动。第三，必须锚定方向，全力重振两国方案的政治前景。两国方案是国际社会公认的解决巴勒斯坦问题的唯一可行路径，任何犹豫、质疑、动摇都不可接受。加沙和西岸都是巴勒斯坦国不可分割的组成部分，以色列应尽快结束对巴勒斯坦领土的非法占领，停止破坏巴勒斯坦民族权力机构的治理基础。国际社会应当充分尊重巴勒斯坦人民的意愿，秉持8人制8的原则，推进加沙战后重建，回归两国方案的正确轨道，早日实现巴勒斯坦独立建国。唯有如此，才能实现巴勒斯坦和以色列的和平共处，实现中东地区的长治久安。主席女士，中方在巴勒斯坦问题上始终站在和平一边，站在公道一边，站在良知一边。中方将一如既往地支持巴勒斯坦争取民族合法权利的正义事业，推动早日结束巴勒斯坦人民的苦难，为地区重回稳定、人民重获安宁做出不懈的努力。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
سيدة الرئيسة، نثمن عقد هذا الاجتماع الذي ينعقد في توقيت بالغ الحساسية، ونشكر مقدمي الإحاطات نائب المنسق الخاص رامز الأكبروف ونائبة المديرة التنفيذية لليونيسف حنان سليمان على إحاطتيهما الشاملتين. ونود التطرق إلى النقاط التالية. أولاً، انطلاقاً من دعم مملكة البحرين للجهود الدولية والإقليمية الرامية إلى إنهاء الصراع في قطاع غزة، بما في ذلك الخطة الشاملة لإنهاء الحرب في القطاع، والدور المنتظر لمجلس السلام في دعم ترتيبات عملية تسهم في الاستقرار وإعادة العمار وتحسين الأوضاع المعيشية والدفع نحو مسار سياسي جاد وموثوق، تؤكد المملكة أن نجاح أي مسار للسلام يتطلب كذلك معالجة التصعيد المقلق في الضفة الغربية، باعتباره عاملاً من شأنه تقويض الثقة وإضعاف فرص حل الدولتين. وتتمثل أبرز مظاهر هذا التصعيد في التوسع الاستيطاني ومصادرة الأراضي وهدم المنازل والمدارس والقيود المفروضة على المدن والمخيمات وتصاعد عنف المستوطنين ومحاولات فرض واقع أحادي الجانب، بما يزيد من معاناة المدنيين ولا سيما الأطفال ويهدد فرص التهدئة والسلام. وأن ما يبعث على القلق هو تصاعد وتيرة العنف ضد الشعب الفلسطيني في الضفة الغربية بشكل غير مسبوق في ظل غياب المساءلة، حيث قتل 76 فلسطينياً في الضفة منذ بداية عام 2026 بحسب الإحصائيات الأممية. وفي هذا السياق تؤكد مملكة البحرين على أهمية حماية المدنيين وحماية الأطفال من تداعيات هذا التصعيد الشديد الخطورة. تحذر مملكة البحرين من تداعيات السياسات والإجراءات والممارسات المذكورة لكونها أحادية الجانب، وتهدف إلى فرض واقع جديد، وتنتهك القانون الدولي بما في ذلك القانون الدولي الإنساني وقرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة والحقوق غير القابلة للتصرف للشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق، كما تتعارض أيضاً مع الإجماع الدولي الرافض لضم أي جزء من الأرض الفلسطينية. ثانياً، إن الانتهاكات بحق المقدسات الإسلامية والمسيحية ومحاولات تغيير هوية مدينة القدس هي أبرز عوامل الاحتقان المقلق في الضفة، ونحذر في هذا السياق من التداعيات الخطيرة لهذه الممارسات على مشاعر ملايين من المسلمين والمسيحيين حول العالم، وما قد تسببه من تأجيج للتوتر. كما تجدد المملكة التأكيد على أهمية خطاب التعايش والتسامح في مواجهة الفكر والسلوك المتطرف، وتشدد على ضرورة احترام الوضع التاريخي والقانوني القائم في الأماكن المقدسة ووقف الانتهاكات لا سيما أعمال الحفر غير القانونية أسفل وحول المسجد الأقصى. وعلى هذا الصعيد تؤكد مملكة البحرين أن المسجد الأقصى المبارك والحرم القدسي الشريف بكامل مساحته هو مكان عبادة خالص للمسلمين، مشيرة إلى أن إدارة شؤون المسجد الأقصى خاضعة للوصايا الهاشمية التاريخية على المقدسات الإسلامية والمسيحية في القدس الشريف. وفي هذا الصدد نرحب بمبادرة المملكة الأردنية الهاشمية الشقيقة لعقد الاجتماع الوزاري الطارئ ومخرجاته، والذي عقد في العاصمة الأردنية عمان في 5 أغسطس الجاري. ثالثاً وأخيراً، تؤكد مملكة البحرين أن القدس الشرقية جزء من الأرض الفلسطينية التي تشمل الضفة الغربية وغزة، وهي عاصمة للدولة الفلسطينية التي يجب أن تتجسد على خطوط 4 يونيو 1967 لتعيش بأمن وسلام إلى جانب دولة إسرائيل، تحقيقاً لحل الدولتين وسبيلاً للتوصل إلى التكامل الإقليمي المنشود بما يحقق الأمن والاستقرار والازدهار لكافة شعوب المنطقة. وشكراً السيدة الرئيسة.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Madam President, allow me to begin by thanking Deputy Special Coordinator Al-Akbarov and UNICEF Deputy Executive Director Suleiman for their updates and for the UN's continued work in the occupied Palestinian territory. Somalia remains deeply troubled by the recent surge in violence across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The past weeks have seen more civilian deaths, injuries, displacement, and destruction, worsening an already dire humanitarian and security situation. We unequivocally condemn the growing violence and terrorism from Israeli settlers against Palestinian communities, often in a context where Palestinians are left unprotected. These attacks on civilians are not isolated incidents. They are happening in a wider context of long-standing occupation, illegal settlement expansion, demolitions, evictions, military operations, movement restrictions, land seizures, and ongoing settler violence. Together, these factors are eroding the foundation of Palestinian life in the West Bank. Since January 2025, over 33,000 Palestinians have been forcibly displaced by Israeli military operations in Jenin, Tulkarm, and Nur Shams camps, which is the largest displacement since 1967. Many more lives remain at imminent risk. Settler violence is a major driver of this crisis, with more than 1,800 attacks in 2025 alone, affecting some 280 Palestinian communities. This pattern must be reversed. Somalia reiterates that Israeli settlements, including those in East Jerusalem, are a flagrant violation of international law and Security Council Resolution 2334. A worrying development has also been seen in the increasing use of archaeology and heritage claims to justify settlement expansions and restrict Palestinian access to land and holy sites. All actions that alter the status or demographics of the occupied Palestinian territory must stop and reversed immediately. We are particularly alarmed by measures that fragment the Palestinian territory, threatening its viability as a contiguous sovereign state. Continued settlement expansion undermines not just future negotiations, but the very basis of the two-state solution. Madam President, as we have heard, the situation for children demands urgent attention. Palestinian children are facing violence, displacement, detention, abuse, and disruption of their education. prolonged insecurity is inflicting severe psychological distress. School closures, movement restrictions, and attacks on education have become alarmingly common. The ongoing financial crisis and the disruptions to UNRWA schools make matters worse. Children must not grow up seeing violence, occupation, and displacement as a normal daily occurrence. Their protection and that of schools, hospitals, and civilian infrastructure must be guaranteed under international law. The impact, dear colleagues, goes beyond children. Restriction on movement and access are affecting healthcare, livelihoods, water, and sanitation, and are making it harder for humanitarian organizations to provide assistance. Humanitarian workers themselves face growing danger and obstacles. We are especially concerned by the recent incursions into UNRWA premises in East Jerusalem, including repeated unauthorized entries by Israeli security forces. Such incidents cannot be normalized. UN premises must be respected and protected, and UNRWA's vital work must not be jeopardized. Somalia is also concerned about the deteriorating situation facing the Palestinian Authority, especially with the occupying powers withholding of hundreds of millions of collected tax revenues, which undermine the provision of basic services. Weakening Palestinian institutions while settlement expansion accelerates moves us further from peace. Accountability is essential. Violence by settlers must not go unpunished. Restraint and de-escalation must be prioritized. Yet restraint alone will not solve the root causes, which are entrenched in occupation, settlement expansion, and the lack of credible political horizon. The West Bank and Gaza are one territory and must be governed by a single legitimate Palestinian Authority. A political process that ignores this will not bring lasting peace. Somalia stands firmly for the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the 1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. The Council must ensure that just and lasting solution remains achievable. We call on Israel as the occupying power for an immediate end to settlement activity and violence, full respect for international law, unhindered humanitarian access, protection of civilians, especially children, and real accountability for violations, including ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity. Madam President, above all, unless the international community and this Council turns commitment to this two-state solution into meaningful action, we are maintaining the status quo of Israeli occupation, perpetual violence and suffering for the Palestinians, including children and the people of the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to our briefers this morning. As the United States has said many times, we strongly condemn violence by any party in the West Bank. The United States appreciates the Israeli government's condemnation of and the increased actions to counter violence in the West Bank. Israel has taken specific steps, such as increasing law enforcement actions, to boosting the IDF presence, and to allocating significant financial resources to counter violence. The United States will continue to work constructively to increase security, reduce tensions, and enhanced stability that is beneficial for both Israelis and Palestinians alike. President Trump's 20-point plan to end the Gaza conflict makes clear that the PA must verifiably complete a slate of reforms. The United States will not accept compensation for terrorism under the guise of welfare or through any other attempts to evade detection under a different name. The United States reiterates its opposition to annexation of the West Bank. The Security Council must continue to show our strong support to the Port of Peace and the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. They are working to advance President Trump's peace plan, which this council endorsed in its historic resolution 2803 last November. We also welcome the progress that the board and the NCAG have achieved so far. This includes boosting humanitarian assistance with safeguards in place to minimize Hamas's stealing and looting of resources. We further welcome the milestone achieved at the end of July, when Hamas finally, and for the first time, committed to an actionable plan for its disarmament. All parties must build on this momentum to full and irreversible disarmament and ensure that Gaza is never again a launching pad for threats to Israel's national security. This path forward, as the Board of Peace has noted, holds the promise of delivering significant benefits to the people of Gaza. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement, and I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Denmark. And I would like to start by thanking Deputy Special Coordinator Alaparov and Deputy Executive Director Suleiman for their briefings. What we've heard today is not just statistics, as DED Suleiman stressed this morning. It is the daily reality of Palestinian children living under the threat of settler violence, loss of livelihood, demolition, and displacement. These realities were also reiterated in the Independent International Commission of Inquiry's report examining violations and crimes against Palestinian children that was published in June. At the same time, we hear that July was an exceptionally deadly month in the context of settler-related violence. This is why Denmark, together with France, Greece, Latvia, and the UK, supported by other council members, called for this urgent meeting. Colleagues, the two-state solution, as chartered in the resolutions of this council, remains the only viable path to resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Last September, 142 states reaffirmed their support for this vision in the New York Declaration. But for this vision to materialize, the current trajectory in the West Bank must urgently be reversed. We would like to emphasize 4 urgent matters. First, settler violence must stop, and those responsible must be held accountable. No Palestinian child should witness homes set ablaze, access to schools hampered, destroyed livelihoods, or blocked water sources. We urge the Israeli authorities to take immediate measures to prevent violence, protect civilians, and ensure accountability. The European Union has recently put more extremist Israeli settlers and organizations responsible for serious and systematic human rights abuses against Palestinians under sanctions. Second, the expansion of illegal settlements must end immediately. We remain deeply concerned by the potential issuing of tenders for the E1 settlement, which threatens to separate East Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank and divide the West Bank in two. We urge businesses to be aware of the potential legal, financial, and reputational risks associated with bidding for these contracts. We once again stress that Security Council Resolution 2334 must be fully implemented. Third, Palestinian children deserve to grow up under a functioning, effective, and reformed Palestinian Authority able to pay salaries and provide essential services. We therefore reiterate our call for Israel to release withheld tax revenues and for the PA to continue its important work on necessary reforms, including on democracy and good governance. Finally, the developments in the West Bank cannot be separated from what happens in Gaza. The stability of both Gaza and the West Bank is critical to any lasting peace, including to Israel's long-term security. It is in the interest for both Palestinians and Israelis to transition Gaza from war to peace. We took note of the recent news of progress towards an agreement on the disarmament of Hamas and urge all parties to reach a full agreement on this decisive issue. And we continue to call on all parties to fully respect the ceasefire, on Hamas to disarm, and on Israel to ensure the phased withdrawal of the IDF in line with Resolution 2803, as well as to ensure unhindered humanitarian aid. A lasting ceasefire will lay the groundwork for early recovery and reconstruction. In this regard, we welcome that the EU has launched the Team Gaza initiative, which Denmark is a part of. This initiative will contribute to the much-needed early recovery efforts in Gaza, including crucial areas of water infrastructure, removal of rubble, and waste. Colleagues, developments in the West Bank threaten the vision of a two-state solution that we, as international community, have elaborated in so many resolutions and declarations over the past decades. The longer we wait, the less realistic that vision becomes. This Council must stay loyal to its decisions and ensure the implementation of a two-state solution, reuniting Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, under a reformed Palestinian leadership along the 1967 borders. Two states where Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace and security. And I now resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Madam President, allow me at the outset to express our appreciation to you for convening this urgent briefing upon the request of Denmark, Greece, France, Latvia, United Kingdom, supported by Bahrain, China, Russia, and Pakistan, to address the critical situation and ongoing escalation by Israeli occupation forces and settlers in the West Bank. Allow me also to thank the two briefers, Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Ramiz Al-Akbarov, and Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF, Ms. Hanan Sulaiman, for their comprehensive reports. And let me also add, I listened very closely to the very clear, principled, powerful statements from all of you with regard to the violations committed by the Israeli occupying forces and the settlers against the Palestinian people, especially children, and we appreciate this very strong sentiment. And as many of you have indicated, what is needed is action. You are the Security Council. You have responsibilities to act and to enforce international law and your will and resolutions, and not a single party to continue disrespecting all of us, not listening to any one of us, to be held accountable and to be brought to the position that the Charter of the United Nations expect as an obligation from each member of this esteemed organization, the United Nations. We cannot continue to meet, to condemn, to explain, to give details, and yet business as usual. Somebody takes note, ignores all of us, does not respect its obligation as a member of this organization, and we do not act. We can act, we should act. We are formed as a Security Council to make sure that the international peace and security of the world is maintained, and if any one party, a state, does not meet its obligation in this regard, to be held accountable, and you have tools available to you to act. Madam President, Israel's objective remains the same: seizing maximum Palestinian land with minimum Palestinians. All its policies can be traced back to this singular objective pursued through military assault, settlers' violence, home demolitions, discriminatory laws, and annexation measures. The tools and the excuses may vary, but the pattern is always the same: uprooting Palestinians from their land or denying them the right to build on it, to grab it. To the Palestinian state recognized by nearly 160 states. We exist as a state. Look, I sit behind the plaque that says State of Palestine. We have 160 countries that recognize the State of Palestine, including the great majority of the members of this Security Council. The reality is that one state is illegally occupying the land of the other state. So therefore, we need the international community, the Security Council, to help the State of Palestine that lives under ruthless occupation, illegal occupation, using the words of the International Court of Justice, to help us to end this illegal occupation, as the International Court of Justice said, as rapidly as possible. Of course, we appreciate all efforts to make this occupation less vicious, if there is such thing as that, in the process and in the way and the path of ending this illegal occupation. That is the main objective: ending this illegal occupation, not to make it a nicer occupation. And many of you have exercised that during the time of putting an end to colonial occupation and control in the past. So I don't need to explain to you what you were struggling for in order to attain your freedom and liberation. We are the last kid around the block. We need to end this evil system imposed on us, oppressing us, stealing our resources, killing our children, doing all the evil things that the UN reports describe, all of the agencies of the United Nations describe, and other NGOs, organizations describe as well. So it needs to end. And all people who respect and honor international law and their obligations as members of the United Nations and the principles enshrined in the Charter of the UN is to help us to put an end to this tragedy. We, the Palestinian people, are doing our role. We are staying in our land. We lost thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands killed and injured during the last 3 years alone. And we are doing our job in order to attain freedom and independence of our state. We need the help of those who believe in the same principles that we are committed to. And we appreciate the fact that some of you took some measures. But there is more that needs to be done, because this ruthless occupation, illegal occupation, is refusing to abide by everything that you describe, by all the reports that describe, by the articulation of the International Court of Justice. Then what should we do? Just keep urging them, keep appealing them, or resort to measures and use tools available to us? Some of you are doing it in their national capacity. We appreciate that. But there is more that needs to be done so that this illegal occupation cannot feel that will make all of us come to the conclusion that we are wrong and this illegal occupation is right. The Palestinian people are telling you by paying heavy price, we will never surrender. We fight for our legitimate rights, including our right to self-determination, the independence of our state, and the right of the refugees. We are doing that, and we are not reinventing the wheel. All of you who faced similar situation, you struggled for your rights. But also all of you received support from the international community, and we expect support from you. It has, to the Palestinian state recognized by nearly 160 states around the world, Israel opposes the settler state armed and unhinged with its full support and complicity. It has created an enabling environment for violence by its soldiers and its settlers, guaranteed to them effective impunity, unleashed them against Palestinian communities, refugee camps, and villages to torment and terrorize the Palestinian population. Many of you gave details about these things. For years now, we have called for international protection. Many of you referred to that need. International protection in accordance with the resolutions of this very council, for deterrence, for real accountability, for practical measures to counter these policies on the ground, not only condemn them in international fora. And while countries are taking measures, as I said, they are no match to the Israeli grave breaches, nor are they dissuasive in nature. Only when it is too late will the world again realize that the cost of inaction far exceeds the burden of resolute action. In the West Bank, this attack against the Palestinian people includes an attack against the Palestinian Authority, whose role is essential in preserving Palestinian presence in the land. Through the theft of our financial resources, which many of you refer to the attack against our institutions, which many of you refer to, Israel is seeking the collapse of the PA in the hope that this would precipitate the transfer of Palestinians outside of Palestine, displacement. Madam President, throughout the occupied Palestinian territory, annexation is underway. It's not an idea. It's underway. Brutally and relentlessly. Palestinians have now been confined to 30% of the Gaza Strip, 40% of the West Bank, and 13% of East Jerusalem. This is by design, through decades of policies aimed at emptying the land of its people, displacing and replacing them. These last few years saw a dramatic acceleration of these policies that have yet to be met with an appropriate response able to put an end to them. There is some action. We need more and more and more until this illegal occupation to yield to the international law and the position of the Security Council and its resolutions. In Gaza, Israel's response to the agreement reached over disarmament and full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza was not to welcome it, but to reject it and to continue its bombardments against the Palestinian population. The Comprehensive Peace Plan and the New York Declaration rely on key principles: no occupation, no annexation, and no displacement. This is what the two plans have in common. This Israeli government is fully committed to pursuing all three at all cost and by any means. We all say no annexation, no occupation, no displacement. They are not only saying, they're working day and night by all means, yes to annexation, yes to occupation, and yes to displacement. The plan builds towards reunification of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, as many of you have indicated, under the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian self-determination and independent statehood. The Israeli government is fully committed at preventing them at all costs and by any means, and they don't hide it. They announce it every day. While Palestine and the Arab and Muslim countries are doing their utmost, and a number of these examples and statements that were released recently were referred to, are doing their utmost to ensure the implementation of the plan, Israel keeps undermining it, whether for electoral purposes or territorial objectives. This constant undermining of international efforts has to stop. Lives are at stake, and they cannot be subject to electoral calculations or radical ideologies. The future of the region is at stake, and it cannot be left to be decided by colonial appetite or hegemonic aspirations. We have a common vision and a common plan, and cannot allow any spoiler to derail them. They must be implemented. All of us are saying we want to implement the 20-point plan of President Trump, reflected in resolution of the Security Council 2803 and the New York Declaration. All of it, the plan, the 20 points, not a la carte menu. You select from it what you like and you discard the rest. No, from point 1 to point 20 and the New York Declaration. The international will cannot bow before the colonial whims of the Israeli government. Madam President, elections are to take place in Israel and Palestine in the coming weeks. The world should send an unequivocal signal that it has charted a path for Palestinian freedom, self-determination, and independent statehood that leads to two states, Palestine and Israel, living side by side in peace and security, and to a region of sovereign states that together can foster a future of shared peace, security, and prosperity. The other path leads to a very different outcome, one this region has visited time and time again, one of occupation, wars, loss, and bloodshed. How much more bloodshed from our children and our women and the vulnerable and all the Palestinians we need to put at the altar for this illegal, vicious occupation to leave us alone and to allow the international community to prevail and succeed in supporting the Palestinian people in their quest for freedom, dignity, and independence. Show our people that there is a peaceful path that leads to freedom, dignity, and security. I appeal to you, the Security Council, show our people that there is a peaceful path that leads to freedom, dignity, and security, and demonstrate to the Israeli people that this path of colonizing Palestinian land and controlling and destroying Palestinian lives is not the path that leads to security, peace, and acceptance. It is time for our region to unleash its true potential, one that can only be achieved through a free Palestine, respect for the rights and safety of all peoples, and the sovereignty of all states. Thank you very much, Madam President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I would like to convey our thoughts and prayers to the people of Colombia following the devastating earthquake. Madam President, as we gather to discuss the escalation in Judea and Samaria, let me set the record straight. Israel condemns all violence against Israelis and Palestinians. Israel does not tolerate extremism. We confront it, but we do not ignore the reality on the ground. While Israeli extremist attacks are declining, Palestinian terrorist attacks are rising, making up the majority of attacks in Judea and Samaria. This May, there were 348 Palestinian terrorist attacks only in Judea and Samaria, 8 pipe bomb attacks, 282 stone-throwing incidents, 32 firebomb attacks, 24 arson incidents, and 2 serious car ramming attacks. That is up from 325 attacks in the month of April. According to the Israeli security forces, another 408 terrorist attacks were stopped before they could happen. How many of you have condemned these terrorist attacks against the Jews? None of these attacks were mentioned by the briefers, and none of these attacks were mentioned by many of you. This is the bias we are confronting today. This council is focusing on one side of the violence while ignoring the other. Madam President, Israel is combating extremist violence in all its forms. When it comes to Israeli extremism, we are expanding our presence on the ground in Judea and Samaria. Israel's comprehensive framework has led to increased enforcement against Jewish extremism. Those efforts have been successful. Through the first quarter of 2026, we opened 354 investigations, filed 20 indictments, and arrested 35 extremists. This has led to a decrease in extremist violence. There were 116 total incidents of Israeli extremist violence in June, down from 165 in March. Enforcement is ongoing. Last week, an Israeli was indicted for alleged killing of a Palestinian near Hebron. He will face the Israeli justice system. We condemn this violence. We prosecute these crimes. We hold perpetrators accountable. Our Prime Minister, Defense Minister, military leaders have all made clear addressing extremist violence is a priority for our government. At the same time, Israel is intensifying its efforts to prevent Palestinian terrorism. Our security forces are working every day to dismantle terror networks and prevent attacks before they reach Israeli civilians. We are finding a growing threat. Iranian weapons, funding, and training are flowing into Judea and Samaria, alongside efforts by Hamas to establish new terrorist infrastructure. Madam President, the Palestinian Authority is supposed to help us to mitigate this problem, to fight terrorism, but instead they continue to fall short of that responsibility. Even after presidential decree for Mahmoud Abbas the US State Department informed Congress that the PA continued pay for slay. Through 2025, they distributed about $200 million to terrorists and their families. We still see incitement to violence promoted in their communities. This doesn't stabilize the region, it fuels the violence. Madam President, this terrorism does not just threaten communities in Judea and Samaria. You know the proximity. It's being exported throughout the state of Israel. The danger is present, the violence is endless, and the victims are real. A few months ago, a Palestinian terrorist infiltrated Israel from the village of Kabatia. It's a village near Jenin in the northern Samaria. He drove from Kabatia to Bet Sha'an, an Israeli city 25 miles away. He rammed his car into Shimshon Mordechai, who was killed standing on the side of the road. Then he hit and injured a 16-year-old boy in a nearby town. The terrorist kept driving to the entrance of a kibbutz, En Harod, where he rammed into Aviv Maor. She was waiting for her parents to pick her up from the bus stop. After he rammed into her, he stabbed her until she died. Aviv was only 18. She loved nature and animals. She was passionate about horseback riding and photography. That was not it. He continued driving. He kept going. He found one more victim at the entrance to the city of Afula. When the terrorist couldn't run the man down in his car, he smashed his head with a rock. A 50-minute rampage of terror until he was neutralized. Let me ask this council, why wasn't there a special session after that incident? What about the shootings at bus stops in Jerusalem and other events? Madam President, this reality reflects a double standard that we must address today. When speaker after speaker refers to settler violence, it is an insult to thousands of years of continuous Jewish history in the land of Israel. Jews have never been and will never be settlers in Judea and Samaria. The vast majority of residents in Judea and Samaria are law-abiding citizens. Those committing violence are a tiny fraction of the people living there. They do not represent the broader community. That is why when you actually use the term settler violence, it's a provocation. Why? Because first, it denies our connection to the land of Israel. It distracts from constant terrorist attacks against Israelis, and it collectively labels entire innocent communities for the crimes of the marginal extremist minority. When Israelis are involved, some of you uses a collective label. You call it settler violence. See how many times you used it today. But when Palestinian radicals carry out attacks, you refer only to the ones responsible. And that is the standard for all extremist violence around the world. You know, look at your countries. Take a look at the UK. A few months ago, a radical Islamist stabbed 2 Jews in Golders Green, the Jewish neighborhood in the heart of London. Did you use the attack to label nearly 4 million British Muslims as a threat? Did you describe it as evidence of Muslim violence throughout Britain? Of course not, because you understand the difference between extremists and an entire population. That is not justice, that is prejudice. Yet that is exactly the standard being applied to the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria today. 500,000 Jews. So when you say settler violence, what do you mean? That 500,000 Jews are terrorists? Support terrorism? Madam President, While Palestinian terrorists seek to drive Israelis from their homes, some voices in this council speak as though Jews have no right to live in Judea and Samaria. That is not true. We are not occupier, we are not settler. Our right to live in our land is based on our historical connection to it. It is described in the Torah, the Old Testament, and even the Quran mentioned the connection of Jews to the land. This past week, Jews around the world read this verse from the Torah. I will read it first in Hebrew. כי אתם עוברים את הירדן לבוא לרשת את הארץ אשר אדוני אלוהיכם נותן לכם וירשתם אותה וישבתם בה. And in English, you are crossing the Jordan River to inherit the land which God is giving you. You will inherit it and dwell in it. Judea and Samaria is where our story in the land of Israel began. It is where it will continue. There has been a continuous Jewish presence in this land for thousands of years. The name Jerusalem, Hebron, Bethel, they are not names invented by modern leaders or modern politicians. They are part of the DNA of the Jewish people. And this history was recognized by the international community. The League of Nations mandate for Palestine affirmed the historical connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. It called for the founding of a Jewish national home there. The international legal framework established after World War I confirmed that historical connection. That framework included Judea and Samaria. Our history is not a political slogan. It is part of our historical and international record. Madam President, I could lecture for hours about our biblical rights, our historical rights, our legal rights to Judea and Samaria. But if we want to be practical today, and if this council is serious about bringing security and stability to the region, it must understand a simple truth. We are not going anywhere. Jewish communities will stay in Judea and Samaria, just like the Palestinian communities. Over 500,000 Jews live in 4 large cities and over 200 communities in Judea and Samaria, alongside over 2 million Palestinians. The Jewish communities are not temporary outposts. They are not obstacle to peace. They are permanent neighborhoods, cities, home, families. Today, this council has a choice. It can either repeat rhetoric that fuels the conflict, or it can support real efforts to find a way to live in peace, in stability, and security. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.